my favorite sessions. This is Learning to Learn. And the 2-minute overview is that it is a bunch of strategies that I have found that improve my learning experience. And what I mean by learning experience, I mean that when I do sit down to learn something new, not only is that effort rewarding, it's also rewarding in the long term in that my retention is better, my understanding is better. And that's it. It's just a bunch of strategies that I've employed. The number of strategies that I have tried and I do use is far more than what you see in this talk. And the reason why they are not in this talk is because a strategy might have not worked for me, and therefore I have no frame of reference, no perspective to give you, and therefore there's little point in talking about it. The other part, where there are techniques that I still use that are not in this talk, is mostly because this is a 1.5 hour session, and you will see by the end of the session that despite having 1.5 hours, I still run out of time, right? And that's it. So if anyone has any questions about the content they're going to see, anyone want to stick around, anyone debating if they want to leave? All right, so I can get started. Excellent. Allow me to introduce myself before I start. I'm Raju, and I'm loosely typed on Twitter. Now let me explain my background here. Why did I start thinking about how to learn? This was about a decade ago. I got my first job in Columbus, Ohio. I was making little money. I was in a new city. I had just moved into Columbus, Ohio. Little money, lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, had no friends, no hobbies. And all I did was go to work, come back home, read my books. And I'd just come out of a graduate program. So that discipline that we have in school, which we often neglect, right? All good students neglect the schedule that schools provide you. But that environment has a lot of benefits, right? You go to class, you come back home, you do homework, you work with peers. And that environment fosters better learning experiences. Living by myself, doing things on my own didn't scale. Over time, I found I was slipping. Then I got a better job. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment, found myself a few more friends, a few hobbies, and then things just went downhill, right? So I started thinking about how to better improve my learning experience, and by chance I came across this book called Talent is Overrated. If you never read this book, it is definitely an inspiring book to read. Now, in that book, the thesis of the book is that the people we look up to, we admire, that we sit down on Saturday nights to watch, pro football players, Tiger Woods, Michael Phelps, musicians, artists, creative folks. They don't reach the very top because they are talented. They reach the very top because they work very, very hard. Now granted, I will never be Michael Phelps, because Michael Phelps has a genetic advantage over me, right? With feet like those, of course he swims better, right? But I can get very, very close. That's the thesis of the book, that he takes away that escape hatch that we have, right? Oh, I'm not talented enough to do X. And he says, that's not true. You can do it. You may not get to where Tiger Woods is, but you will get pretty close. But that wasn't what struck me about the book. What struck me most about the book was his take on these people's ability to keep improving, to keep learning. When we think about it, and we're thinking about Tiger Woods' lifestyle, we're thinking he lives in a mansion, he's got people to do the front lawn and laundry, and take out his dry cleaning. Of course he's good at golf. What else has he got to do? Right? He swings the damn thing, everything 8 hours a day. Of course he's good at golf. But that's not true. These people have extremely hectic schedules. They're performing throughout the year in tournaments against peers who are almost as good as they are, or maybe better. They are constantly doing public relations, PR, occasionally ending up on the 9 o'clock news channel, right? They're extremely active lifestyles. How many people play golf in this room? Any golfers in the room? Okay, you might be able to correct me on this one, because I know nothing about golf. Tiger Woods supposedly has won 4 different championships with 4 different kinds of swings. He actually changed his swinging technique 4 times. and still manage to beat the world's bests. The question is, how does he do it? Right? He's got a pretty busy schedule. That's what started this journey. And so I started reading all these books. I started reading books by tennis coaches and chess grandmasters, child psychologists, talent consultants, all kinds of books. Over the last 4 to 5 years, I've read probably 50 to 60 books on this subject. Now, it's easy when you're reading a tennis book and the tennis coach says, practice your serve 15 times a day, 30 times a day, right? Which is practical. It's a kinesthetic skill. You need to make that muscle memory. My big problem was, how do you translate that to our field, to the programming field? Do I practice the main method 15 times a day? Right? Do I practice how to write a function 15 times a day? Right? How do you take those lessons and bring them into our world? That was one challenge. The second challenge was, if you read all these books and you just read them, everyone talks about different things. But if you really look, peel away the covers, you will notice, whether you're reading tennis coaches or chess grandmasters, anybody in any kind of skill set, the basic principles are the same. And so what I started doing was started taking notes on these principles. And that's where this talk comes from. Now, going back to practicing the main method 15 times, right? Everything clicked together when I read another book called The Little Book of Talent. And that is truly an evening read. It is this thin book, 52 Strategies for Learning. It's a really good book, The Little Book of Talent. And in that book, the author suggests that any skill, every skill, playing the piano, playing tennis, programming, public speaking, can be broken up into 2 parts. The hard skills and the soft skills. I have these quotes in the slides. I love quotes, and I occasionally throw them in my slides. This is Michael Jordan, and he says that get the fundamentals down and the level of everything you do will rise. Essentially, another way to read this quote is, imperfect practice only makes you more imperfect, right? If you practice right, you will get it right? Perfect practice makes you perfect. Hard skills are those portions of the skill set that you are learning where you always have to be consistent. Always have to be consistent. So, let's take an example. Anyone do public speaking in this room? How many of you have attended a meeting in your life? Yes, then you've done public speaking, right? You have a room of 5 to 6 people who are listening to what you have to say. It's public speaking, right? You don't have to be in a conference to do public speaking. You've already done public speaking. Given this knowledge, right, that you've attended a meeting, can you name one thing where you always have to be consistent?
Enunciation.
Enunciation, right? You have to be clear, eloquent. How about body language, hand gestures, voice projection, right? This is a long room, so I'm using a mic, but generally we just throw our voice across the room and hope that the people in the back can hear it. These are all hard skills. Programming. Can anyone think of a hard skill?
Syntax.
Syntax. And I very rarely get that answer. But syntax is where you have to be consistent. What happens if your syntax is bad? Bad things happen, right? So, when learning a new programming language, try and focus on the syntax. We developers, we love these challenging problems. You come to a workshop, you learn a little bit of a web framework, and you're sitting there thinking, I wonder if I can make the next Facebook killer. What? No. Yeah. Step by step. Go easy. Learn the hard skills. Talking about web frameworks, like any kind of web framework, can anyone think of a hard skill when it comes to a web framework? Anyone use Ruby on Rails? Grails? Okay. Spring MVC? Okay. You have to add a new route. You have to add a new controller. In Ruby on Rails, how many places do you have to touch? Touch a routes file, add a controller, do something else. 2 or 3 files that you touch consistently, right, to make a new route happen. Spring MVC, you have to add annotation over here, change this file over there, and then things just work. Hard skills. If anyone's seen Rails casts by Ryan, what's his name? Whatever, the guy who did the videos on Rails. If you watch this guy, he's a genius at it. He just flies, this file, that file, touch this, boom, entire working blog engine. 3 minutes. How do you do it? Hard skills. He doesn't have to think about which file to touch next. It just comes to him, right? When it comes to programming, practice the syntax. Some of you might have attended the closure talks that Stuart was giving here, or you might have attended a talk by Brian Sletton. You have to know how to declare a namespace. You have to know how to write a for loop in that language. If you don't know these fundamentals, how can you solve a problem, right? So that practicing the main method I told you about earlier, that is actually valuable here. You have to keep practicing the same syntax again and again to get it right. How many Java developers in the room? Any Java developers? All right, if I woke you up in the morning at 3 o'clock and I asked you, here's an array, for loop over it, and double every item in the array. You will write the array, go back to sleep, and never ever think about it again. Why? Because you've written so many for loops in your life, right? It's auto magic now. And that's why you can solve such complex problems in Java. Because you're not thinking about the syntax, you're thinking about a higher abstraction. How many of you have written a singleton in Java, a singleton pattern? Right? There's only one way to do it, one good way to do it. Right? Practice, practice, practice. That's a hard skill. Someone comes to you, write singleton, done. Hard skill. Let me explain soft skills, we'll come back to hard skills in a second. Soft skills are where you read a situation, recognize it, and react to it. Going back to our public speaking example. Meetings. Can anyone think of a situation like this where you have to read a situation and react to it? You guys are tired. You guys are bored. You're thinking it looks sunny outside. Right? And so I ask you, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? Anyone know? How many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb?
How many do you think?
Very nice. Actually, that is pretty clever. Just one. But the light bulb must really want to change. Right? Now everyone's perked up. Right? That's a soft skill. The ability to read the audience, feed off your energy, and be able to adjust appropriately. Now, let's talk about soft skills in the programming realm. Can anyone think of a soft skill in a programming realm?
Recognizing anti-patterns?
That's one. Actually, pretty much all we do is soft skills. They don't come to you with the code. They come to you and say, we need this problem solved, right? And you apply what you have learned so far to that domain. So that singleton pattern I gave you example, right? The example of the singleton pattern. You know how to write a singleton pattern. Recognizing when you use a singleton pattern is a soft skill. Now, I cracked that extremely bad joke, right? It was pretty lame, even I'll admit. Did voice projection matter? Did body language matter? Did hand gestures matter? Even when I'm cracking a joke, which is a soft skill, right? When I see this need to crack a joke, I'm exercising hard skills. Soft skills are built on top of hard skills. If you don't know the syntax, you cannot solve a domain problem. If you don't know which file to touch in a web framework, you cannot introduce a new route based on your domain. So, the takeaway from this section is that hard skills are key to performance. The ability to perform without thinking is a hard skill. It should be automatic. You don't think about for loops anymore, right? No one thinks about for loops anymore because we write them without thinking. The for loop is merely a medium to express what we are trying to do. Does that make sense? The other good news about hard skills is you can practice them without context. Can I practice having a bored audience at home? You have kids. Well, there you go, right? But you have to get them in the room, pet them, talk to them for 20 minutes before they get bored, right? It's very hard to practice a soft skill. Can you practice writing a for loop 10 times a day? Yes, absolutely. The nice thing about hard skills is you can practice them indefinitely. If you're learning golf, how to hold the, what do you call the irons? What do they call it? Clubs. Thank you. Where do we got irons from? Clubs, right? How do you hold the club? You can practice at home, right? But adjusting to the wind, whatever criteria there is in golf, I really should stop talking about golf because I know SWOT about it. The point is, that is a soft skill. The way you grip, the way you swing, the way your body is held is a hard skill. Does that make sense to everyone? Excellent. Is anyone from Russia in this room? Like Russia, or you like Ukraine? Okay. In the book, Talent is Overrated, I believe. They talk about a Russian tennis school. How many people watch tennis in this room? Anyone watch tennis? You might have noticed that over the last like 15, 20 years, Russian women have dominated tennis. Outside of the Williams sisters, they pretty much dominated tennis. And supposedly, most of them come from one school in Russia. One school produces superstar after superstar. So the author of the book went to that school, interviewed the 68-year-old lady who runs the school. What do you do? And she said, my kids cannot enter a tournament for up to 3 years after enrollment. All they do for 3 years is hard skills, hard skills, hard skills. What happens when you put a learning kid who's learning how to play tennis in a tournament? What happens? All they care about is winning. That's all they care about. Any hack, any shortcut, any bad practice, doesn't matter. It's all about winning. This is what happens when we get thrown in a project and your boss comes to you and says, let's start using Scala tomorrow. You are flailing, right? That's why bad code comes in, because you're flailing, right? You're struggling. There's a very popular saying, and I love this saying. If you can't do it slowly, you can't do it fast. So think about that. That's how it should be. There is an author called Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck is at some university. She spent pretty much 30 years of her life studying how kids learn, how children learn. She's come up with this theory. The book is called Mindset, by the way. Very, very good book, especially if you have kids. Mindset, very, very good book. Entity theorist versus incremental theorist. Basically what she says is you can take any child and they will be in a spectrum between these two. They'll be tipping either more towards entity or more towards incremental. The entity theorists tend to be the kids who are raised in an environment where only the results matter. Get an A, or you're not good enough for math, right? The kids who are brought up in this environment often have this ability to, or often have the habit of saying, I am not good at X. The problem with this approach is that they intrinsically tie the ability to do something with an innate trait. You are either good at something or you are not. The notion that you can work towards something doesn't even strike them. These kids eventually grow up to be adults, and as adults, this mindset can be as extreme that many people will not even try something new if there is a chance that they will fail at it. I have come to the conclusion that we tend to be entity or incremental in different areas of our lives. How many of us blog regularly? Any bloggers in the room? We've got one room. How many of you think you have nothing to share to the world, so I'm not going to blog? You've got Joey in the front, a few others, right? Most people are scared about this because they think, I have nothing to share, which is not true, right? Let me talk about incremental. We'll come back to why I brought that point up. Incremental theorists realize that any skill can be mastered, or at least can be learned incrementally. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, there's going to be successes, there's going to be failures. They don't normally tie this notion, okay, I'm good at math, with their personal identity, because they separate themselves from the effort, right? They're two different things. When it comes to learning, you want the incremental mindset. You want to know that there will be failures, and in that failing, there is learning. If you're always successful, you're not pushing yourself hard enough. The point of this section, right, is that you need to take a long, good look at yourself. Ask your friends, ask your significant other, ask your spouse. Ask them, given a certain situation, what's my normal reaction? Am I afraid to do it, or am I willing to go forward and try it? And they should be harsh with you, because you want to be incremental. Going back to the blogging example, right? Some of us don't blog because we have an option. When it comes to our profession, right, we have to be incremental because the compiler beats it out of you, right? How many of us had a perfectly syntactical, valid, working first snippet of Java code? Raise your hand. It was worthy of like framing and sticking on the wall. Nobody. The first thing that even passed the syntactical error check, right? So we are incremental in that sense, but you might not be incremental in some other areas of your life. You might not blog, you might not play golf, you might not go scuba diving. Whatever it is that you're trying to learn, it's going to involve failure. Accept it and appreciate the fact that from that failing is learning. If you're always successful, there is no learning. Does that make sense? The other good news in the book is that if you, and I can tell you this from my background, most Indians are raised in the entity mindset. Most parents don't care. Either you get an A or you're useless, right? I can tell you that from personal experience. I see a few nerds up front. Yeah. How do you think my first no fluff just up session went? It was a complete disaster. The people in the back couldn't hear me, the slides wouldn't work, it was a complete disaster. Get yourself up, dust yourself off, try again, and you try again, till you get to a point where you're somewhat comfortable. Right? You can never be comfortable at this. You can never be comfortable with 60 people sitting in a room looking at you. But, right, you can get more comfortable. Does that make sense? I just recently read an article on New York Times which said that the fact that you know now the difference between entity and incremental automatically makes you incremental. So don't remember this, don't forget this lesson.
Remember this.
Yes, remember this lesson and you're automatically incremental. There is also a term called neuroplasticity of the brain. Again, it's defined in this book, which claims that you can change your mindset. I know I changed, right? Everyone can change. Be more incremental. In the late 70s, the United States Air Force or Navy or someone was trying to make better pilots. And so they hired these two brothers, the Dreyfus brothers, and said, come on in and help us make better students, make better learners, make better pilots. So after years of research, the Dreyfus brothers established a learning model. This model has come under some controversy lately, but the principles are pretty found. What they said is every learner will start at the novice level and advance their way towards the expert. The novice is driven by rules, checklists. I'll give you an example. How many of you can cook in this room? Like, really cook, yeah. I can cook. I would not feed it to you, but I can cook, right? Years ago, I was at a friend's house. She's vegetarian. She made this fabulous dish. Walked up to her, I said, give me the recipe. She wrote it down on a piece of paper. I took it home with me. A few weeks later, I had some time. Went to the grocery store, bought the groceries, got back home, read the first line in the recipe. It said, take saucepan, take 2 tablespoons of olive oil, wait till hot. I pick up the phone, I call her, I say, what is hot? Tell me, is it 185 degrees? Because I've got a thermometer right here. Better tell me. Right? That is the novice. That is checklist driven. If you ever found yourself learning something brand new, you are the novice. You might have found yourself, hold the guitar like this, or hold the golf club like this, right? Every step needs to be stepped out. If something goes wrong, right? Let's say you're learning a new programming language. What is your first thing? You go to the blog 101 tutorial, you say, it says go here, download this, install that. Something chokes, what happens? Frustration, exasperation, right? Lots of screaming. That's the novice. The advanced beginner is more guidelines driven. You can tell them, wait till hot. They have some notion of what that means. They're still pretty checklist driven, but the checklist doesn't have to be down to every single step, every single edge case. Right? There's not that much hand-holding required. The competent is where things start to get interesting, because up until now, you had no notion of context. Right? I have no notion when I'm cooking what the grand scheme of things eventually mean. If the oil is a little hotter, all that happens is the cumin seeds will pop a little bit faster. That's all it means, right? I have no notion as a novice what that means. As you approach the competency level, you can kind of see that bigger picture, that vague outline of the system. The nice thing about being a competent is you remember the frustrations you had as a novice and as the advanced beginner. You remember that things can go bad, that you get frustrated. The nice thing about the competent is they still cannot solve problems on their own, but they know where to go looking for answers. I'll give you a classic example, and I know Craig Walls is here in this conference. Craig Walls is the author of Spring in Action. He just released the 4th edition. We used to use, I don't do Spring in Hibernate anymore, but up until a year ago, most of my projects had Spring in Hibernate. Right? I know enough about Spring in Hibernate to go looking in a file to say I have to change this to make that happen. Anything goes wrong, what do? Stack Overflow. I have no context, but I know enough, right, to get in trouble, and enough to get out of it. Right? I don't know the big picture yet. I'll skip over proficiency in 1 second, go to expert and then come down back. The expert is best explained by an example. Most of you come from different parts of the country. So, most of you drive, right? All of us drive, right? You might have had this situation happen. You are driving or you are helping a 16-year-old, learn how to drive. And this is their first time on the freeway. Or you're driving, you see this guy like fly in on the entry ramp, right? And somewhere in your gut, you know he's going to cut you off. And 10 seconds later, he does. Has this ever happened to anyone?
Sure.
Yeah. How do you know? This happened a million times before. Wait, you live in Boston?
Here.
Okay. It's happened before. Anyone else?
You can just feel when he's going to be there and where you're
How do you
gonna be.
feel it? How do you know?
The lane is correct, the bird lane.
Anticipating the contextual cues around
The
you.
contextual cue, that is actually correct. The actual answer is your gut. Your gut tells you. There's a book that came out this year called The Sports Gene. Gene as in Gene, genetics. I was listening to a podcast by the author, and he said in that podcast, and I believe it was Mike Tyson. So if you are in a boxing ring with Mike Tyson, right, and the amount of time it takes for his fist to go from here to your face is 1/3 the time it takes for your eyes to start seeing the fist moving, send the message to your brain, who processes it, sends a message to your muscles to move. 1/3 the time. Which means if you waited for that fist to start moving, you get hit every single time. Right? Baseball players. You play baseball? You cannot wait for that ball to leave the pitcher's hand before you start swinging. You need to start swinging before the ball leaves. And I'm not saying this is professional, baseball, but the point is that is how these baseball players play. Is they have to start swinging before the pitcher even pitches. Question is, how do they know? The author of the book calls it a cognitive database. A cognitive database that watches for these cues. The shift in the body weight, the drop in the shoulder, and you can kind of tell something's going to happen. I had a attendee in Reston this year, I believe, who said that the car example I gave you, he called it the car's body language.
Yeah.
You can kind of like sense, this guy's a little fishy, right? That's the expert. The expert is so intrinsically linked into the system that any ripples in that fabric they can feel, in their gut. They can't explain how you know. You can't explain why you did what you just did. Your normal response is, I just knew. Taking a step down, the proficient is very close. They're thinking in terms of abstractions, right? So when most of you are Java programmers or JavaScript programmers, you've done it long enough, you don't think about this function, that method, this class, that package. What do you think about? Abstractions. If I came to you tomorrow and I said, I need a website that is for a conference, the conference will have many speakers and many attendees, all speakers will have many sessions, every session will have many attendees. What did many of you do in your head?
Form that model.
You kind of drew those tables out in your head, right? Were you thinking, oh, this class, this method? No. Abstractions.
Yeah.
Proficiency. Now, the point of this entire discussion was that you need to kind of at least establish what level you are at and pick those resources that are best aligned for that level. If you are learning a brand new programming language, you're learning a brand new framework, you're somewhere between these two. Go read the 101 tutorial, right? Don't be too proud to pick up the basics, the fundamentals, like the go do this, install that, check this, figure this out, and you can finally get to work. As you progress, better books at this level, usually it involves thinking in abstractions. If you're not working with a language at work or at home, you might want to think about open source projects or contributing to one. What is it about open source project that requires you to be proficient?
Code review.
Code review, right? Another one is you walk into an open source project that might be alive for 6 months, a year, 2 years. You can't start reading every line of code. You need to be able to drop in, understand the high level design, be able to fix something or add a new feature, right? So pick a resource that is applicable for the level you are at, right? Know where you start, pick a resource, work your way higher and higher, pick better and better resources. Does that make sense? The other thing I'll tell you is that not only is it important where you are, it's nice to have at least some sense of where you want to be. For example, this was 6-7 years ago, oh my god. My project decided to start using jQuery, the big hotness at that time. What did I do when the boss came and said, we're going to start using jQuery from tomorrow? I went and picked up the jQuery in action book, the big Manning tome. That time you should still buy like the dead tree version, right? No PDFs or whatever. I read 1/3 of the book, right? I went to work and I could do everything I needed to do. What did I do then? I stopped reading. But then that book sat on my desk. You feel guilty, right? $50, oh my god, I wasted this money, right? The point I'm trying to make is that wherever you are, try and figure out, at least now, I want to know enough to like get by, or I'm really interested in this technology, I'm going to spend time and effort on it. Because there's no point reading the jQuery in action book from cover to cover if all you have to do is DOM selection. Right? What's the point of reading how to write a plugin? How does it matter? It doesn't matter. You're wasting time. And I can assure you, there are too many things to learn to waste your time learning something you're never going to use. So get a sense. When I started, this was 2009, Stuart Holloway gave his first Clojure presentation at No Fluff Just Stuff in Columbus. I convinced Jay to let me attend that one session. I walked in. I heard Stuart talk about Clojure. He was super excited. I looked at it that time and I was like, all right, I'll look into it. So I read his blog post. I played around a little bit. So I decided I'm here. I'm not going to go buy any books or anything. Just go read some blog post, install it, play with it, see how I like it. Today, as I stand right now, I have read every book. I have watched every video series. I have read 200 blog posts on this language. I have RSS feeds that feed me news on Clojure. Why? Because I want to be here. I'm putting in that kind of time and effort because I know it's going to buy me something. Right? Your choices may differ, but the point is, know where you are, know at least roughly where you want to be. That is a moving target. You might decide to drop out early, you might decide to keep sticking with it. It's perfectly fine. Another thing I'll bear in mind is that being a novice isn't such a bad thing. If you're a novice at something, yeah, it's okay, right? There are things like in MongoDB. We actually use MongoDB on a very small project at a client. I never picked up a book, nothing. Every time I had to do like a query, Stack Overflow. Just don't care enough, right? Didn't have time, don't have the bandwidth, don't care, stick at novice. I'll give you another example. Every year, I make a promise that in January, I will do my taxes. Every year, in April, I'm scrambling, right? Every year, there's a form, 1099 div, section A, 12A, take this number, you take a TurboTax, right? Take TurboTax, 12A, please enter this number over here. And 9 out of 10 times, that number's not there. What do? Call up TurboTax, right? What is TurboTax? The checklist, right? And I am never, ever, ever, ever going to buy a book on taxes. I don't care. I'm okay being here. I have no problem. Spring and hibernate, I am here. Don't care. No offense to Craig, I'll never buy his 4th edition book. If they ship it to me for free, kudos. It'll stay on my bookshelf. I ain't buying it, right? Does this make sense? The point of this is to make learning like a road trip. Know where you are, know where you want to go, at least initially. You can always change the plan later. The question is, you have a starting point, you have an end point. How do you get from point A to point B? The answer is to be smart about it. When I mean smart, is to you need an action plan. An action plan to get you from A to B. Some of you might have attended my Getting Things Done talk yesterday. Part of that philosophy kind of leaks into over here. What I do, let's say today I've come out of Richware. I just learned about closure. I've decided I'm a novice at this. Let's play around with it a little bit and see if I like it or not. Right? Let's say for example. So what I do is I set up specific, measurable, achievable, and relevant time goals. The point being the measurable piece being very, very small increments. Why increments? Because you're incrementally learning. Right? Small steps, not big leaps of paradigm shift. So what I do, this is tomorrow, this is ground zero. I know nothing about closure. I realized I'm a novice. You go to the one. So what I do is that I set a goal for 7 days. 7 days. At the end of this 7th day, I should have achieved this. Let's say my first step is install closure. So perfectly specific, it's measurable, it is actionable, it is relevant, and it is time boxed because it's 7 days. So I set an action plan in play for 7 days from now. You are not allowed to set this timeline more than 7 days. You plan 7 days ahead, at the end of the 7th day, you start again. You know why 7 days? Most people will say, by the end of this month, I'll have read this book. And then, the Broncos are playing the Patriots. It's Thursday, you're tired, you decide it's a good time to watch an NFL game. 1 week goes by, you're thinking, I have 3 more weeks. I'll finish up, I'll catch up reading. 2nd week goes by, you think you have 2 more weeks. The 3rd week goes by, and then the 4th. If you plan for 7 days, you can make something happen. I can tell you from personal experience, you cannot predict what the 7 days going to look like, right? You get sick, somebody else gets sick. You get a flat tire in the middle of the highway, bad things happen. Life changes course. So what I do is start today, at the end of 7 days, I should have installed closure. The end of that, I get a sniff test, a litmus test. Do I care enough about this technology or no? Yay or nay? If I care more, I set the next one. Let's see if we can write a hello world program or something to that effect. Make an action plan, I work 7 days, I move forward. Does that make sense? You need an action plan because there is no place for inspiration here. If you're waiting for inspiration, I can tell you, ain't gonna come. Why? Because Breaking Bad's available on Netflix. Right? How many of you watched the 5th season 2 times? Anyone? I'm guilty, I watched it twice. So if there's not Netflix, there's Blacklist. Right? There's always a pro football game on TV. Inspiration is for amateurs. Professionals go in with an action plan. You need step-by-step to-dos to get you from point A to point B. I'll tell you yet another thing. I would rather you spend half an hour every day than 4 hours on a Sunday. Because the minute you put that 4-hour clock and you start it on a Saturday morning, all you're thinking of is, crap, I've got 4 hours. What do? Go, go, go. Right? Every day half an hour gives you an ingestion period. It gives you the ability to sit back and let things marinate. And you can come back and say, that didn't make much sense. Let me try this again. Or I read this chapter in this book and I'm going to reread it. It gives you that ingestion period. Don't try and cram it. This is not an exam. Slow, incremental progress. Point A to point B. Every week gives you the ability to adjust. Do I care anymore? Do I not care anymore? How many of you, did anyone watch Dan Hinojosa's talks in this room? Daniel? Anyone? No, doesn't matter. He's one of the speakers on the tour. Early this year, he decided, I want to learn closure. So he uses the Pomodoro technique. The Pomodoro technique basically is, Pomodoro means tomato in Italian, I think. What it means is you start a timer for 25 minutes and you work fully focused. You don't check email, don't check Slack, don't check Facebook, no Twitter, nothing. 25 minutes. Because the good thing about this is at the end of 25 minutes, you know you're going to get a break. Then you take a 5-minute break, work for 25 minutes, work, take a 10-minute break, repeat the whole cycle. Any interruption gets marked off. That's a little elaborate. But the point is, he did 1 Pomodoro every day from January to April. So roughly 4 months. He come out the end of April, he was pretty good. Slow, incremental progress. Does that make sense? Good. Now we're talking about this kind of thing. Normally programming involves practicing, right? We mentioned earlier that you need to practice the main method like 15 times a day. That might be a little excessive, but let's talk about practice for a second. So far what have we covered? We've covered who you are. Are you entity or incremental? And what do we want to be? Incremental. We know where you stand on the learning spectrum, right? I'm learning closure and I'm a novice. Now there you have some leeway. If you already know Haskell, you can assume that you might be slightly ahead of a novice. So you can allow yourself some space in how you assess yourself. But be careful. How many of you have recruited a new programmer on your team? They're writing Groovy code, which is essentially Java code without the semicolons. Anyone seen this kind of code? I've seen it all over the place. It's Java code, just skip the semicolons. That's Groovy, right? Oh, of course, the file name ends with a Groovy extension, right? What happened here? Some Java programmer decided, I need to learn Groovy. I already know Java. I can just come and start writing Groovy code. So that baggage can bite you. Just be careful of that. So we know who you are, we know where you stand, and we have a rough idea of where you want to go. And you have an action plan to go from point A to point B. Deliberate practice was a paper written in 1984, I believe. And if you read any material on learning, this has got to be one of the most cited papers in history. Also, if you have any trouble sleeping, I highly encourage this paper. I'll distill it down for you. It's Benjamin Franklin, never confuse motion with action. Let me ask you a question. Most of us shampoo our hair every day or every other day. Right, roughly, a rough schedule. How much better has your shampooing technique? Hold on, but serious question. How much has your shampooing technique gotten better in the last 3 years? 0. 0, right? Let me ask you another question which is more relevant to our topic at hand. Typing. Most of us type what? 3 to 5 hours a day, roughly? How many of you have seen an increase in words per minute over the last 3 years? 1? Okay, good. Was that because you wanted to or because it just happened?
I wanted to.
Okay, you out. That's confusing motion with action. The reason why your shampooing technique, your typing, has not improved is because you are confusing practicing with mindless repetition. Once we reach a certain level of aptitude, we plateau. Without the necessary nudge, the necessary push, like he said, he wanted to improve, nothing's going to happen, right? If you really practice, think about what you are doing. You can improve scalp coverage in less time. It is possible, right? Deliberate practice involves 3 steps: reaching, repeating, and staying engaged. These are the 3 steps you need to pursue to get better at anything. Let's talk about reaching. The reason why your shampooing technique or your typing skills haven't improved over the last couple of years is because you normally operate in the comfort zone. The comfort zone is where you have an 80 to 90% success rate, you're relaxed, you don't have any tension, no pressure, you're just going with the flow, which is perfectly valid. You can't be in a stress zone all the time. The complete opposite of the comfort zone is the survival zone. This is what you are in when your boss calls you up at 3 o'clock on a Saturday morning, tells you production just went down, and Bob over there who wrote all the code is on vacation at Richmond. So come fix it, right? What do? You know nothing about this code base, you don't understand the domain. What do?
Call Bob.
What's that?
Call Bob.
Call Bob, yeah.
I'm teasing.
What you do is you flake. You hack something, you spin, you compile, you deploy, you cross your fingers, hope things work. And that doesn't happen, what do? You repeat the whole cycle again. Zero learning happens. Just like the comfort zone, zero learning happens. All you're trying to do is hack your way to success. The same reason why that Russian tennis school does not send kids to tournaments too early. Because all you are doing is getting in that survival zone. Zero learning happens. The key to learning, and perhaps you can emphasize this more, is to just get outside the comfort zone but stay outside, behind the frustration zone. So if you're typing 60 words a minute, every day you promise yourself, for 20 minutes I will type at 65 words a minute, right? And then you make that your comfort zone, and then you stretch it to 70 words a minute. Does that make sense? How do you get to this when you're learning a new programming language, or you're learning a new web framework, or what have you? I have a few suggestions for programming languages. Anyone heard of the koans? Alright, which one did you do?
Ruby codes?
Which one did you do? Ruby, the most popular one. Bred out of Columbus, Ohio, by the way. A koan. Does anyone know what a koan is? No.
Is it kind of phone?
No. A koan in Zen world, the Zen tradition, is a question that can have many answers. And the idea behind the question is to allow you to elaborate and introspect on a certain thought process. That is what a koan is. In the programming realm, if you look at a Ruby code, and I've got one here, and I'll go to make this. Is that big enough for the people in the back? Okay. This is the first Ruby code, and maybe not the first, I just picked one out of this. The way it works is it's a method, it's actually a test. The test has fill in the blanks, and it says create a new array, and then assert equal empty array dot size, right? So actually, I think I picked the solutions here. Oops. So that's what the quiz looks like. So let's assume that this was a one-liner. What's the answer here? 0. Right? If you create a new array, what's the size? Is 0. Right? Let me give you another example. And this will be groovy code. Assert fill in the blanks equals true. What's the answer? No, what equals true?
True.
True. Very good.
Or 1 or
Depends on what language you use.
Well, yeah, yeah. But true equals true in groovy, right? But what about that? Right? You can write n number of solutions to this problem and still get it right. That's why they call them koans. The idea is it allows you to explore a language via tests while giving you the flexibility to play with multiple kind of answers. That is a koan. And I can tell you, if you've done the Ruby koans, if you've done the JavaScript koans, by the end of it, you're a pretty good Ruby programmer. You may not understand the paradigm of Ruby, but you understand the syntax of Ruby. You understand the core library of Ruby pretty well. Is that somewhat true? I highly recommend koans if you're learning a new programming language. You can pretty much find a koan for every language today. Clojure, Scala, JavaScript, Lisp, Ruby, Java. I actually taught a class with Java koans. Another one is the 99 Lisp problems. Anyone done these? Oh man, you guys are missing out. Don't let the Lisp confuse you. You can solve these problems in any language. So I'll give you an example. The first question in this list is, how do you find the size of a list? Now let's say you're learning Java for the first time today, right? How do you find the size of a list in Java?
Size.
Dot size, right? Very good, you just solved the first one. And you move on to the second one. The nice thing about both the koans and the list problems, especially the list problems, is that after you get to through the first 15, the 16th one, you can reuse parts from your first one. You can invoke that method and then use something else on top of it. So incrementally you're building your skill set. Don't let the 99 confuse you. Just because you solve the first one in like 10 seconds or
They
3
get harder,
seconds,
yeah.
they get hard and they get hard fast. By the time you hit number 27, 30, you're sitting there for 3 days thinking about the solution. They get hard fast. But no learning experience like it. One of my best ways to learn any new programming language is the 99 list problems. Just Google for 99 list problems and start solving each one incrementally. Project Euler is another good one. This is more algorithmic based, not language specific. It's good till the first 10, 15. After that, it gets a little crazy. So, I'll give you another example from Michael Fogus. Does anyone know who Michael Fogus is? He wrote the recent book, Functional JavaScript. He has also written a book called The Joy of Clojure. He's a very, very sophisticated programmer. And what he does is he maintains a list of pet projects written in his favorite programming language. And anytime he's learning a new programming language, what does he do? He ports everything over, right? So, the domain is solved. He doesn't have to think about it. He knows what the domain looks like. What is he practicing? Hard skills, right? Get me the syntax, understand how to write a for loop, introduce a namespace. Because the domain is the soft part. Problem solved. I'll give you another example. Anyone read the book Programming Collective Intelligence? Oh man, I envy you. I read that book just for fun. It is such a good book. All the examples are in one language. You're learning a new programming language. What do? You port it. He's done the legwork for you. All you gotta do is port the thing, right? What are you practicing? Hard skills, hard skills, hard skills. That is key. I said deliberate practice is 3 things: reach, repeat, stay engaged. Talk about repetition. This is Bruce Lee. I fear not the man who has practiced 1,000 kicks, but the man who has practiced 1 kick 1,000 times. Right? Repetition. The nice thing about our work environment, our working situation, is that we have all the tools for repetition. Imagine you were learning how to woodwork. Repeating yourself, creating the same chair 50 times gets expensive, real fast, right? But in our world, repetition has only one cost, your time, and that's it. And we are willing to spend time because we have now, at some point, committed to learning something new, right? Source control, unit tests, automation. I asked you earlier, how do you find the size of a list? You're solving the first problem in 99 list problems. You write your solution, dot size, you write a test to make sure everything works, and you run the test. Everything works, what do? You commit. Now I'm asking you to repeat yourself. Repeat the solution. Find another way to find the size of a list in Java. What do?
Loop over and count.
For loop. Do an iterative solution. Run your test. If everything passes, check it in. Think of a third way to find the size of a list in Java. Anyone? Recursion. You can recurse. Call the same function again and again with a counter, removing one item from the list each time. Run your test, see if everything passes, check it in. Repetition. The best part, you've created a nice safety net. Remember I talked about failing and failing well earlier? I said failing is where you find success. What happens if you fail? What happens if your recursion blows the stack? What do? Git, reset, hard, head. You're there. Safety net, right? This is the reason I hate ebooks. We get these ebooks, right? PDF. What do you do when you get a new ebook? Cyber Monday just went by. I bought more books than I should have. I download them on my iPad. I want to read a new book. What do? I go to the den, pull the Ottoman a little closer, I put on the TV, right? I'm reading this book, and the author says, type this snippet of code in your terminal. What do? Copy, paste. Right? That's what the normal reaction is to copy paste, right? Where's the repetition?
Copy paste.
There you go. You get really good at copy pasting. Assuming that's your objective, then go for it, right? Most people know Stephen King, right? The prolific author. Now, whether you think highly of him or not is not the point. The point is he is prolific. Supposedly, even today, he takes entire passages from his favorite authors' books, like Hemingway and all those authors, and he still uses a typewriter, supposedly, like a paper typewriter, and literally, word for word, types out those passages. Word for word. Why? Because it slows him down. It helps him think about how that author created this character or evoked this emotion, right? That's what it helps him do. Stephen King can do it, we should be doing it. They should disable the Control-C copy for ebooks. Right? It's very tempting, but where's the repetition? Where are your hard skills? You can finish a whole book. Where are your hard skills? Reach, repeat, stay engaged, be aware. What I mean by this is you're writing solutions to 99 list problems, you're solving the codes. Something goes wrong. Let's say your recursion blows the stack. What is our knee-jerk reaction? Quickly tweak it and run it again. See if it passes, right? I'm saying stop for a second. Think about what just went wrong. Did you not know the syntax? Do you not understand how to write recursion or recursive loops? Did you miss a semicolon somewhere? Stop and think. What does that tell you? What does that failure tell you? That there's a piece in your hard skill set that is missing, that is not coming automatically. Now, let's say it is your first recursive loop and you get it right. I suggest stop and bask in your own glory. Right? Go take a walk. Enjoy some fresh air. I highly recommend Ghirardelli's sea salt dark chocolate. highly recommended. I buy them by like a dozen. Really good, right? The point is learning is incremental. Success and failure. We have to appreciate both, we have to embrace both. If we don't stop at every juncture, what happens? We're just hacking our way in performance mode. There's no learning happening. What's happening is somehow getting to a solution. Another thing that we tend to do quite a bit when we are learning a lot is reading books. Whether they're e-books or physical books, doesn't matter. This is a technique that actually was written in a book, ironically titled, How to Read a Book. So written in 1930s, it is a good book to read, but I read this technique in Andy Hunt's Refactor Your Wetware. Anyone read that book? Good book, Refactor Your Wetware. It's essentially about learning. The whole book is about learning. And Andy Hunt is one of the pragmatic programmers. Andy Hunt and Dave Thomas founded the Pragmatic Programmer Studio. He talks about the SQR3 technique: scan, question, read, recite, and review. How many of us, when the code is compiling or whatever, mindlessly browse Reddit or Stack Overflow just for something interesting? You do it, right? These two guys do it, they look guilty, he does it. Right? Now let's say you were really stuck at work, you had a problem and you went to Stack Overflow and you found a solution, right? Which answer will you remember better? The one you mindlessly browsed or the one that actually helped you solve a problem? The latter, right? Why? Because you were proactively searching for an answer. Right? It's not something that you subconsciously tend to digest, it is actively pursuing an answer. This technique makes reading any book a proactive, question-pursuing session. I'll tell you how it works. Let's say you're learning Clojure. You picked up your first book on the subject. You're reading the first chapter. The first thing you do is you scan the titles and the subtitles. You'd say, let's say the chapter first is Introduction and there's a subtitle called Speed, Concurrency, and Power. There's 3 subtitles. What you do is you take a notebook and you write on it questions like, how does Clojure help me with concurrency? Or how does Clojure make my programs any faster? Or what is the power of Lisp and how can I get it in Clojure? Something like that. And if you can't think of anything, just put a what is in front of it. Right? What is X? Scan, write questions, start reading. When you are reading, you are not reading. You are trying to get those questions answered. Every section you read, you are looking to answer those questions. I usually, between fiction, non-fiction, and technical books, I usually read anywhere between 40 to 60 books a year. My technical list used to be anywhere between 15 to 25 in that. After I started this, it's gone down to like 10. But I never have to look at those 10 books again. I'm done. That is how powerful this technique is. Scan, question, read, look for answers, recite answers to those questions, and the review phase involves writing down answers. I usually skip that. The recite phase could be anything. Grab an unsuspecting significant other or colleague and explain to them what you just learned. Do a user group meeting. Do a brown bag session at your workplace. The best way to learn something is to teach it to somebody else. It will expose holes in your understanding, make you a better person at whatever it is you're trying to learn. Anyone heard of the rubber duck technique? A few hands. Has it ever happened to you, you're stuck at work in a problem, you go to a colleague and say, let me explain the problem to you, and you're talking, as you're telling him the problem, the answer just comes to you? Yeah, that's the rubber duck technique. Your colleague was your rubber duck. Right? This technique was actually on the Ward Wiki, Cunningham Wiki a long time ago, popularized in the Pragmatic Programmer's book. And my friend Matt got so frustrated of being my rubber duck that he actually got me rubber ducks for Christmas. So put this on your desk and go talk to him, because I don't want to hear you no more, right? That's the recite phase. Just talk it out. Explain yourself if you have to. Explain your rubber duck. It will work. I would recommend this for all kinds of books, primarily the books you really, really want to ingest. Really ingest, right? Something you're really interested in learning. If it's your first week of like dabbling in Clojure or Angular, this is too hard a technique for that. Once you've vested yourself, a very powerful technique to really broaden up and open up your understanding. Does that make sense? Now, all along, I've been talking about these questions and answers. One thing I do recommend that you try. Right? This is the electronic generation. Everyone's got laptops and iPads. What I have learned is handwriting is king. King. Undisputed in my word. What I mean, pen and paper. Not iPad, stylus and iPad. Not taking digital notes, but physical, handwritten notes. These questions I told you write down, I write them down by hand. I take notes by hand. And you might be a little skeptical. And I was talking to a friend of mine and he had a theory. This could be a generational thing. Right? There's some young faces in the room who might have been raised in the age of the internet. I grew up with notebooks and pen and paper and highlighters. So it makes more sense to me. Maybe it won't make sense to you. But I highly suggest you try it. In fact, there has been research done on this subject as to whether writing by hand improves your learning experience. And I have done research on that research. And I have found that there is no real answer. It depends. It depends on the material, depends on the environment, the setting. There are a lot of factors that come into play. So they've actually found that subjects that require analytical part of your brain, writing helps. But subjects that require more the creative notion, like literature and poetry, writing does not help. So it's stuff like that. That kind of thing changes. I highly encourage you to try handwriting. Get a nice notebook. Try writing it. And I'll give you a backstory there. Actually, talk about nice notebooks. 5 years ago, when I started playing around with handwriting again, I used to write by hand, got on the digital bandwagon, and then I read this book about handwriting. So I did what every self-respecting geek would do. Google for the best notebook, right? And what did I find? I found these moleskin notebooks. Anyone seen the moleskin notebooks? Oh yeah, they're gorgeous. Leather-bound, beautiful paper, never bleeds. Oh, just gorgeous. $16 a pop. I go to Borders at that time. Borders used to be a store at that time, right? Went to Borders and I bought like 5 or 6. Then the next time I was reading a book, I pulled one off the shelf, cracked it open, and I was about to take my first note when it struck me. This sucker is $16. This thought better be perfect. Defeats the whole purpose of writing, of taking notes, right? So at that time, the girl I was dating, she came to me and said, I'll give you a tip. Don't go to the back to the school sale. Most of you live in areas with the back to the school sale, right? Target, CVS, Walgreens, back to the school sale. Don't go to that one. Go to the back to the school sale, right? Where everyone's dumping inventory. Every year since then, I have gone to the CVS or the Target. 25 cents a pop. Spiral notebooks, buy a dozen, you're set for the year. Then go to town, stick figures, bubble diagrams, do whatever you want. 25 cents a pop. Psh. My suggestion, try it. It really does work. I'm going to skip over this real quick. I'll tell you about what I do in the margin column of my notebooks. If you have a notebook with a margin, what I use that for is my custom set of annotations. So I'm reading a book, right? Let's say you are reading a book, right? You're on your laptop and you're reading Clojure's book, and they talk about persistent immutable data structures, and they tell you that these are inspired by Osaki's thesis on immutable data structures, on that subject. There's a link to the PDF. What do? You click on the PDF, right? Your browser opens up, PDF loads, and then you see all these scary diagrams and graphs and mathematical equations, and then it strikes you. It has been at least 20 minutes since you checked your Facebook status, right? Your friends have to know you're learning Clojure. Somebody's got to tell them. It's not going to tell itself. The browser's already open, right? Just open up a new tab and fill that in, right? I don't do that anymore. I don't click on links. I don't follow anything. I put a to-do square brackets in the margin. And I say, research this paper. And I continue reading. Remember, it's an SQR3 technique. So I'm writing those questions down. I'm trying to find answers. If I hit something I don't understand, I put a question mark. Didn't figure this out, doesn't make any sense. Move on. Something I think is really important, or something that's an idea or an insight, I make a note. A lot of times I don't have to go back over my notes, because generally by the end of those sessions I'm well digested. You know, my rubber duck has had his fill of closure or what have you. Usually I only go back to look at these guys and see if there's anything that's worth checking off. In the resources section of the slide deck, there's a link to something called Mighty Notes. And that guy has a 2-page list of annotations that he uses for meetings, but he's got some good ideas on how to annotate your notes. Really, really useful. He'll ask you for an email address, just give a dummy one, it still works.
You don't
Get a
need the
PDF.
confirmation.
What's that?
You don't need the confirmation in email.
Maybe you do. I usually use Guerrilla email or some sort of pseudo email proxy service, and you get a PDF link, you're good, right? You're good to go. Mighty Notes, take a look, very useful. But I have this whole set of annotations that I do. A lot of times, actually, I even take my paper notes and digitize them. I'll show you an example over here. Any of you use Markdown? Okay. Anyone know John Cleese, the famous English comedian? This was a video by him. When I was watching the video, I was taking notes on paper and pen. And then I digitized them using Markdown. So there's some things, like I've read this book, Talent is Overrated. I've got handwritten notes and then digitized notes. What does that help me do? Repetition, right? So all about deliberate practice. And again, this is a bad example, obviously, but the point still stands. I am willing to take that kind of trouble to learn something new. And by the way, if you've never read John Cleese's new book, excellent. All right. With that said, how's everyone doing so far? Making sense? Excellent. Now, just a little bit of a conversation piece I had with somebody in the audience a little bit early on. They said, shouldn't this talk be the first talk in the conference versus the last? And I think it was you, right? Yeah, the one in the pink shirt, right? It doesn't matter, somebody. And what I said is, in my opinion, learning doesn't happen here. Learning happens after you leave here. You come here to find those useful nuggets of information, right? That to-do list. Then you go home and you learn. No learning happens here, right? There is social interaction, there is some understanding, there is no learning. You go home and learn. Anyways, another thing I've used quite a bit is mind maps. Anyone use mind maps in the room? Okay. Mind map looks like this. So I know people in the back can't see this, so I'll zoom in a little bit. This is a mind map. Oops, sorry about that. This is a mind map. Learning to learn. So what you do is you take a blank piece of paper, preferably a large one. In the center, you draw the concept you're just learning about. And then, let me take a step back. You're sitting in a meeting, your boss tells you, oh, we need to take care of this. And your brain goes from that to something else, to something else, to something else. And then it suddenly strikes you, oh crap, I gotta buy milk on the way home. Has it ever happened to you? Like this weird connection of threads, leads to something totally unobvious. That's what mind maps let you do. What they let you do is, once you've got your context, you let your brain go nuts. If you hit one thought, spin off a branch like this. If the next thought that strikes you is somewhat connected, branch off again, otherwise just spin off a new branch. And you keep going till you get something that looks like this. Now, I usually do this at the end of a book or when I've studied a subject enough that I'm trying to see the big pictures. how does everything fit together? Like how does these things come together? How do these things come together? And you can see how like things group with a mind map. I never go past this. Some people digitize mind maps. Some people use digital mind mapping tools. Those have never worked for me. I spend too much time dicking around with fonts and icons to get anything useful out of it. So I've decided to use pen and paper. Works for me, right? You might notice that this is actually what made this talk. After 4 years of reading on this subject, I decided to sit down and like quickly scribble what stuck with me over the time, and then write the talk. So it helps me get that big perspective, this overarching narrative. There are some things here from a very good book, and hopefully we'll get time to talk about that. But these are mind maps, and I don't suggest you buy this book. No offense to the author. The author is Tony Buzan. He's considered the father of mind maps. If you Google for mind maps and click to the images tab, pretty much every mind map in this book is on Google. So I won't waste your money. Just if you want to see what a mind map is about, you can just Google it. You'll find out what a mind map is. Now I'm not going to get all preachy on you, but before I go there, does anyone know what this means? Yes. No, the other way actually. A healthy mind in a healthy body. That's what this stands for. If you regularly exercise, kudos. If you don't, I'll give you a couple of action steps. One, go talk to your doctor first. And don't sue me. Right, just saying. The second action that I will give you is read this book. This is John Ratey's Spark. And it is a phenomenal book. John Ratey is extremely approachable when it comes to certain subjects. This is one of his favorite. In fact, the book he wrote just before this was Driven to Distraction. In that book, his thesis is that you can solve 90% of ADD cases and ADHD cases by exercise alone. This book attempts to explain the effect of exercise, particularly cardiovascular exercise, on your brain. The thing about cardiovascular exercise is that it forces you always to do more than one thing at one time. If you are running, you have to avoid traffic and other people and potholes while maintaining form, while maintaining breathing, while maintaining your stance, right? The other thing about cardiovascular exercise, it brings more blood to the brain. It physically alters how your brain is structured. It's a very interesting book. And recent MRI studies have reflected what he has come up with. If you are already into exercising, but you're more into strength training, Tai Chi, yoga kind of things, I highly encourage you to introduce a small element of cardiovascular exercise in your regimen. It is life-altering. Not to mention, you sleep like a baby, right? 2 years ago, I finished a workshop right in this hotel. Then I went for a 5-mile run. And then I went to sleep. The next morning, Beth meets me at breakfast. And she's like, where were you yesterday morning? Like, I was in bed. And she's like, why were you outside at 5 o'clock in the morning? Where the hell would I be outside at 5 in the morning? She said, you didn't hear the alarms? I was like, what alarms?
The fire alarm.
The fire alarm went off. They evacuated the hotel. There were firemen patrolling the corridors. And there I am, out like a baby. I'm not saying this is a safe idea. What I am saying is for a person who used to be a very light sleeper, sleep like a baby. Exercise there is no downside to it. Lower blood pressure, lower stress, endorphins galore, it's all good. It's all good. Try it out. Another suggestion I'll give you is meditation. Anyone meditate in this room? Yeah, you guys saw the Buddhist thing on here. Buddhist thing. If you've not done meditation and you want to try it, by the way, this author, prolific in this space. I won't pronounce the name, I can't pronounce the name. This is Victor Davik, and he's written a book called 8-Minute Meditation. Phenomenal book. And if you don't decide to agree with me, you might decide to agree with Time magazine that says this is the most American form of meditation yet. What he does is he teaches you or asks you for 8 minutes of meditation time every day for 8 weeks with a different style every week. So he introduces you to a new style of meditation every week. And the point being, at the end of the 8 weeks, you will find a style that suits your lifestyle, your personality, and then you run with it. This is what got me into meditation. I kind of fell off the bandwagon early this year. In fall, I found an app on the iPhone, and I don't know if it's there for the Android, Buddhify 2. It's Buddhify version 2, and they have these things where you can say, sitting at an airport, and then you put your headphones on and they tell you, look around you, get the smells in, or whatever. And it's really nice, you can get, but it really works. It really got me back on the meditation bandwagon. The other thing I'll tell you is if you Google for meditation and MRI, you will hit this New York Times article that has shown that meditation will alter your brain structure, physically alter it. It is that powerful. Not to mention low stress, calms you down, improves focus, right? All good things. With this said, I'm almost at the end of this talk. And the point of this whole talk was that learning is a road trip. You need to know where you are, you need to roughly know where you want to end up. You need an action plan to get you from point A to point B. Learning is holistic. The physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual need to be in balance. Exercise, meditation, good diet, good relationships, good work environment, all support the learning process. Whenever you practice deliberately. You cannot practice more, even the most seasoned veteran sportsmen and musicians have claimed you cannot go past the 3-hour mark practicing deliberately. I highly suggest 20 minutes to 30 minutes a day. You can try the Pomodoro technique, do whatever you want. Remember that action plan I talked about? That needs to be deliberate practice. Repeat, reach, repeat, be aware, stay engaged in that process. 30 minutes is not that much to ask on a daily learning process, right? At the end of the day, you have to love the game. If anyone of you are going to walk away with this impression that learning is easy, I hopefully have beaten it out of you. Right? Learning is very, very hard. But anything that is worth learning is worth the effort. Take the time, take the trouble, be diligent, show up. What's the famous saying? 80% of success is showing up, right? I'll leave you with one final quote from the prolific B.B. King. The nice thing about learning is that nobody can ever take it away from you. There's always, even if you learn something that you never use, you learn something from that learning experience. There's no downside. Keep learning. I had a friend of mine who asked me, how do you know what to learn? I've told him, I've spent time learning crap I've never used. But there's nothing to say you didn't learn that, right? There's nothing to say you won't learn from that experience. There's nothing to say that it won't help you in the future. Does that make sense? That said, allow me to again thank you for coming out to RichWeb, for sitting in this last session. I wish you all safe travels home, and hopefully we will see you here next year. Thank you all for coming in.